Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rich Nickel. I'm the president and CEO here at Education Forward Arizona. I think we have a critical mass on the line. So, along with Amanda Burke, I'm going to get started here. First of all, I just want to thank you for joining us today to discuss this essential topic, what Arizona voters are saying about the future of education in our state. For all of you on the phone, and especially for our elected officials, I think you know that we have a responsibility to listen closely to our constituents, our community, and take into account really what they're saying. Voters are not only asking for, but expecting leaders like us to make education a top priority. The goal isn't just about personal success for individuals. It's really about uplifting communities and creating strong and competitive workforces. The data you're going to see today, I think, will demonstrate that this is a winning issue, regardless of your party, regardless of where you live. And we think you'll agree. And we hope that you'll promote that education and attainment are tremendously valuable. And that as a state, we must do more as our voters are demanding to increase access, success, and attainment. Let me hand it off now for a few minutes to Amanda Burke, who's going to introduce herself and walk us through some of what the Center for the Future of Arizona is hearing voters say as they go out and do some of their polling activities. Amanda?
Rich, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today. We're excited to have this conversation. I am Amanda Burke, Executive Vice President at the Center for the Future of Arizona. And at CFA, we are committed to advancing a shared vision for Arizona's future that is guided by what matters most to Arizonans. Through our research programs, partnerships, what we're focused on is driving positive change for the future success of the state on critical issues that include education. We can go to the next slide, please. Today, I'm pleased to be able to share the findings from the Arizona Voters Agenda, which is one of CFA's key survey initiatives. The Voters Agenda is unique in that it reflects voter priorities across political and generational lines. And importantly, we focus on highlighting areas of common ground. It is intended to serve as a roadmap for leaders to guide our state forward, and we're excited to share with you today our findings. What we have found is through our most recent survey research, the 2024 Arizona Voters Agenda, is that it aligns with our longstanding findings. Some of you may be familiar with our past Gallup Arizona survey results, our 2022 Arizona Voters Agenda. And what we are finding is that our research consistently shows that Arizonans share common ground on key priorities to move our state forward, and education stands out as a central issue. So in our survey research, we ask about a broad set of issue areas, ranging from, of course, education, immigration, water, elections, state spending, and consistently education comes out as one of the top issues facing the state. And what we've seen, and this builds on what Rich shared a little bit earlier, is that Arizonans recognize the critical role education plays in personal success and are overwhelmingly support actions to strengthen Arizona's prosperity as a state through increased educational attainment. Arizona voters understand that education is central to our state's long-term success and economic prosperity. And you'll hear a little bit later from our polling partner, High Ground Public Affairs, from Paul Bentz, that Arizonans want practical solutions to support students and prepare them for the future. They believe that post-secondary education, and I want to clearly define that, that includes 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees, as well as trade and technical certificates, starts with access to affordable and reliable childcare, coupled with a strong K-12 system. So Arizonans understand it's the continuum and want to see more young people pursuing and completing post-secondary education. And I'll just wrap up by saying that there's a clear opportunity for our elected leaders to align legislative priorities with what Arizonans are asking for, which is a quality education, practical pathways to post-secondary attainment, and investments in Arizona's future. We are so pleased to be able to collaborate with Education Forward Arizona. This is the second time that we've been really able to look at each of our respective polling survey research to be able to say, when we bring these findings together, what is the bigger narrative that we're able to convey that is grounded in the views and the priorities with a lens on common agreement. So Rich, thank you for the opportunity to partner today and sharing these findings, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Terrific. Thanks, Amanda. I think that many of you on the call know today that we have this great partnership with the Center for the Future of Arizona. It is terrific for us to collaborate on issues like this and be aligned. And one of the things we're also aligned on is the tremendous value of post-secondary education. And if you're just reading political signs, a lot of times you may not think that people in our state think there is that much value in it. And I think today you're going to find out a little bit different. One of the things that we've done over the past couple of years to really emphasize that point of how valuable education and education after training in high school is to start a campaign called Everything to Gain. We used a data report called Billions to Gain, really as source information to show the economic impact that education has. But we really also wanted to understand better how voters and how people who are using our system in Arizona really think about our system. Do they believe in our system? And also, what are some of the barriers that may be keeping them from achieving their goals? And also, what can we do about it? What are the solutions? So over the past year, Education Forward Arizona fielded 3 public opinion polls to help gauge Arizona's perceptions of education and training after high school among Arizonans. And you're going to hear a lot more about those from Dave Metz, who did our polling on this. But I can tell you just briefly that each of these polls was significant. Polls 1 and 3 had 600 voters that we talked to about their views on this issue. And when we talked to students who had either been successful only partially in their post-secondary careers or who had never started, we were able to talk to 400. Shortly, the first poll documented that voters believe that learning beyond high school is absolutely necessary for Arizonans to be successful in today's work world, whether that means attaining a workforce certificate or a 2 or 4 year degree. Arizona voters believe that people who have completed education or training after high school are better off financially and have a better quality of life than those who do not. So don't believe what you might hear out there that people don't value education after high school, or don't think that going to college or university is a good idea. Arizona voters still do. Secondly, we did a poll that asked Arizonans between ages 18 and 40 about why they had either not attempted or not finished an education degree or workforce certificate. And the majority of respondents said that they recognized that their lives would have been better off if they had completed additional education and training after high school. But even with that, they were not able to. And we found out something that we thought we already knew, which the largest obstacle to that education and training opportunity after high school is cost. And we'll talk a little more about why that's important for us to know. And as we go on to the next slide, I think it's important for us to know that the findings were really overwhelmingly positive throughout the work that we did on this polling. They show that supporting opportunities to increase education and training after high school, really is a winning issue for policymakers. Our pollsters even went as far as to say that the findings and the makeup of the groups who approved or who could be talked to about why it's important to approve of this really present a mandate for Arizona and Arizona leaders to do more. And when we think about what that mandate actually means, it's really talking about how our policymakers, our legislators, our administration, and those they work with can do more, and how we can invest more. Also, as we move on, the data we gathered from voters also shows this clear an urgent demand for action here. Action to improve access to education and training beyond high school, specifically. Yet, at the same time, we see executive and legislative leaders recently tend to be moving backwards on this issue. You all probably know with recent budget cuts last year, we think there might actually be harm to important programs, and certainly there was a reduction in investment that was needed to meet our state's goal of reaching 60% attainment by 2030. This is also really important because that attainment goal was not set by accident. The attainment goal was set because we know in Arizona we have to increase our pipeline of qualified workers that are then ready to tackle Arizona's increasing number of 21st century employment opportunities that are coming to our state through some of the CHIPS Act and the great work that our economic and workforce development people are doing in our state. We also know that recent budget cuts have effectively erased a decade of progress in building support systems for post-secondary attainment in Arizona. And these cuts are particularly concerning because they undermine key policies proven to increase attainment. We'll talk more about what some of those are after we hear from our pollsters, but think about things like dual enrollment and AP programs, and think about financial aid efforts such as our Promise programs and adult education programs at our state's community colleges. These are all incredibly important, and they all saw disinvestment or cuts in our last budget. Also, before we turn it over to our pollsters, I think it is important because FAFSA season is once again upon us, and this is a key tool for our state especially to use in finding money to pursue their education after high school. Because we don't have a strong state financial aid system or direct investment in our students that are furthest away from opportunity, completing the FAFSA in order to access that federal aid is extremely important. But we really still have not seen much in the way of investment through the state and through our leaders that make decisions about how we invest in programs in our state to increase FAFSA completion initiatives that are going to help us with some of that cost issue that folks told us they really are encountering as they think about their ability to gain access to post-secondary and enroll. Last thing I'll say here is that while cost is not a new issue, it does remain a predominant issue. Our findings do cancel out some of the noise that we may have heard from the political billboards and signs that we saw, and things that I think we like to think might be going on, but our findings say maybe aren't. So when we think about things like a lack of information to go to college, counselors maybe not giving enough information, the dearth of options when it comes to a locality of a college. Is there political bias where maybe I won't fit into college? We've heard a lot about that in the news and through advertisements and political campaigns, but we really didn't hear any of that or very little of it in our findings. So I think we need to really think about what these key issues are: cost and things that are adjacent to the cost, like childcare and housing, is really the predominant barriers. And then some of the noise that we're hearing, especially during the political seasons, maybe aren't quite as important as we may believe them to be. So I'm looking forward now to handing it back off so we can hear a little more about the Center for the Future of Arizona's findings, and also hear in a little more detail about our most recent poll, poll 3, which really discusses some of the solutions that people are looking to see as we move forward in the legislative session.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Bentz. I'm the Senior Vice President of Research and Strategy at High Ground Public Affairs. And I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the Arizona Voters Agenda, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave Metz, who's going to spearhead the Everything to Gain data that you're going to share today. But one thing before we start, we're talking about data and information regarding voters. And, during the elections, just like Rich was talking about, sometimes rhetorically, Surveys or polls get bandied about mostly because they're horse race questions, where who's winning, who's losing, and we get a lot of focus on that. But the real crux of good survey research is understanding issues like this. It's diving deep into it and helping people understand where the voters are. And what we found, for example, is only about 40% of the electorate thinks that our candidates and our elected officials are focused on the issues that they care most about. And that's what, moves the needle sometimes. But what we're finding is there's a lot of places where people agree, and that's one of the big areas of the voters' agenda. And one of the things that we found, and I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that while CFA helped spearhead this data, the Education Forward Arizona was also consulted on this, and vice versa. The data that they're going to share later was consulted on by CFA. So this is really a collaborative effort among the groups. And this is bipartisan survey research as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Arizona Voters Agenda first. And then this is the product of two surveys, one that was done in the spring prior to the primary, and one that was done in the fall prior to the general election. We conducted the surveys. These were live voter calls for likely voters that had a history of voting in our elections. And this was done in both English and Spanish. The margin of error on this data portion is plus or minus 4.3%. And one of the things that you look at when we talk about these agenda items is agreement. And on the next slide, how we defined the voters' agenda is built on places where people agree. As Rich said earlier, these are winning issues. These are issues that not only 50% of the electorate have strong agreement, or in some rare cases, strong opposition, but also 50% of every partisan group and every age group also agree on these items. And so this isn't something that just one group is pushing or another. This is meant to be sort of a force to bring people together and focus on topics that a lot of voters care about, and try to highlight that in the discussion in the media. This is in the discussion at the debates. We asked moderators to ask these questions and talk about these issues because we know these are the issues that voters care most about. And so one of the biggest things that we look at on the next slide is certainly education. As Amanda mentioned, education stands out. No matter how many times we've done this research, and we talked about and researched immigration, we researched environmental issues, water issues, the economy, healthcare. We've talked about election issues. We've talked about a wide variety of topics, and we have other data on that we've shared in other avenues, but specifically, education always rises to the top. And it's important to note that it's across the board education. As we talked about, the whole continuum of education, we're going to talk about post-secondary, which is a big portion of it, but it's not just post-secondary education. And in fact, what we find is that there are some fundamental, universally held beliefs, including and starting with every school should have the resources necessary to deliver quality education that prepares every child for the future, no matter their skin color, background, or zip code. 96% of voters agreed with this, including 95+ of all partisan groups. This is a universally held axiom that everybody agrees with, and something that should be considered as we talk about education funding. And so this is not just funding one or the other. This is part of the K-12 portion. This is part of the post-secondary education portion. Really, what we find is that voters care deeply about this notion and really want to make sure that there's a quality education for every child. Going on to the next slide, when we talk about K-12 education in particular, what we find is there is 79% of voters that support increasing funding for K-12 education. 66% of Republicans, 93% of Democrats, and 82% of unaffiliated voters believe that. So, no matter who these folks voted for in the presidential election or in the Senate race or any of these other topics, there is this universal desire to increase funding for K-12 education. And almost diametrically opposed, there's 87% opposition to making cuts to K-12 education. 79% of Republicans oppose that notion. 94% of Democrats oppose that notion. 89% of unaffiliated voters. So we've asked this question a couple of different ways. And what we find truly is that in K-12 education, voters would desire investment in the system, not cuts to the overall system. going on, one of the things that we find, and you talk about the different strategies and what can be effective, this is something that I've found in other survey research as well, is that there is a strong focus and importance on reading and ensuring teachers are trained in the most effective approaches to teaching reading. 94% of voters, including across the board, 90+% of all partisan respondents. Strong post-secondary education system starts with strong K-12. And this is something that I've seen not only in the voters agenda research, but in a lot of other education research that I've done. We find similar support for mathematics, the same way that these fundamental foundations, people would like to see not only investment in those, but a focus and emphasis on these topics because they recognize how important it is to the overall education field. More than that, though, we also find on the next slide that in loud and clear, they would like more students to pursue education and training beyond high school. And this is something that Dave is going to delve deeper into. But what we talked about is this notion that less than half of students enroll in any form of post-secondary education. And we made it clear that they wanted training beyond high school to include university, community college, technical, or trade school. 85% of all voters found that to be a priority, found that something that they universally held. And this is all age groups as well, from the oldest voters to the younger voters. This is something that we see, as Rich mentioned, these types of numbers I consider a mandate. These are things that voters want to see. I typically can't get in this hyper divided partisan electorate, you can't get people to agree on a lot of things. I probably couldn't get 85% of the electorate to agree the color of the sky. But in this case, what we find is that, education and training beyond high school is something that is held. And they also, on the next slide, would like to look at other incredibly popular strategies, these practical solutions, as Amanda mentioned, these ways that we can find ways to support these students in their education and training beyond high school. 93% would like to support dual enrollment to earn college credit while in high school. 77% want to increase need-based financial aid to encourage more students to enroll in our public universities and community colleges after high school. And more to the point, 66% of the electorate think it was the wrong direction to make cuts to the need-based higher education financial aid program. In fact, 50% of Republicans opposed this move, 84% of Democrats opposed this move, 73% of unaffiliated voters. This was not a popular action among the electorate here. And it demonstrates, again, some of that strong support we see for that post-secondary attainment. And then they also support, in the next slide, the notion that our universities and community colleges are critical to ensuring Arizona's success now and in the future. State investments in public higher education should be a priority. And this goes to what Rich was saying at the outset here. I think rhetorically, loud people start to bring up topics and get the megaphone and talk about them. But what we find is when you look at the electorate and where they stand on these issues, they have a slightly different view. And bear in mind, this is the electorate. This is the likely voters that, not only passed an abortion initiative, but supported an immigration issue while also investing in transportation funding in Maricopa County and Pinal County, and also voting to support many local school investments as well. I mean, what we're talking about here is the voters can keep more than one concept in mind and prioritize these things and have more than one goal or more than one priority. And in this case, state investments in public higher education, they believe should be a priority. And so just to wrap up this section, when we talked a lot about the strong support for these, what we find is near universal support for a wide variety of some of these education investments, from teaching reading to dual enrollment, to increasing funding, to increasing need-based state financial aid. We also see, we tested some value statements on the next page. We talked a little bit about the quality education for all students, but really we see a very similar value, 53% strong agreement, 79% total agreement for their community colleges are critical in ensuring our success now and in the future. And so that's a little bit of a brief overview of some of the Arizona Voters Agenda. I certainly encourage you to go and look at some of the other priorities for the Center for the Future of Arizona. because it really has been a convening force. And you may have noticed during the election, a lot of the questions that were asked are reflected in this data because they recognize how important it is for voters to get answers to these questions as they're making this decision. And for those folks who are elected officials, these should be some of the guideposts to use in helping make that decision. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Dave Metz, who's going to dig a little deeper into some of the Everything to Gain polling data.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Metz. I am the Democratic half of our bipartisan polling team. I'm a partner with FM3 Research. And I'm going to walk through some of the key findings of the statewide survey we did looking at education and training beyond high school in Arizona, which I think you'll see has a number of findings that harmonize well with the ones that Paul just described, but some that also dig a little bit deeper into voter sentiment on issues that are affecting higher education and other forms of training. First, just a little bit about what we learned about the attitude of voters statewide in this survey, which was conducted shortly before the election. We wanted to understand voters' level of engagement with politics and in the election in Arizona, and not surprisingly, it was off the charts, as would befit a state that was such a linchpin for so many political campaigns and one of the key swing states. 83% of voters rated their level of interest in the election as a 10 on a 10-point scale, much higher than what we see in a lot of states. And that interest, as you'll see on the right-hand side, really cut across virtually all segments of the electorate, regardless of age, gender, race, even political party identification. Voters were paying pretty close attention this fall. Part of the reason for that, as you'll see on the next slide, is that they aren't very happy with the way that things are going in Arizona right now. One of the first questions we ask in most of our polls is to have people tell us how they feel about the direction of their state. Do they think things are generally headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track? We've led with this question in both of the polls that we've conducted for Everything to Gain last November and then this September. And the numbers have come back pretty consistent, with a solid majority of Arizonans telling us they feel like things are on the wrong track rather than headed in the right direction. As you'll see on the right-hand side of the slide, demographically, those concerns are cemented more among the right side of the electorate, conservatives and Republicans. And this often happens when you've got one political party that's in control of the governor's office. Its partisans tend to feel more positive and its detractors tend to feel more negative. But even among Arizona Democrats, it's only half that feel like things are headed in the right direction, 53% among those. So there's a fair amount of discontent out there. And we've seen that reflected in polling data about attitudes toward a variety of different elements of state government. Where it is not reflected, however, is in attitudes toward the institutions of higher education in Arizona, where we see overwhelmingly positive sentiments from voters, both in the survey we conducted last November and then the one that we conducted in September of this year. When we ask people about community or technical colleges, 63% have a favorable perception. When we ask about public universities, the numbers are almost the same, again in the low 60s. And if we ask about local public school districts, they're more divided, about half with a favorable perception and half with an unfavorable one. This is notable because, as we saw before, there's a lot of negativity out there, but it is not directed at these institutions that are responsible for giving people the education and training that they may need beyond high school. This also carries over, by the way, as you'll see on the next slide, when we ask people about private universities in the state or online universities. Here we've got a larger segment of the public that says they don't know enough to offer an opinion. But among those who do have an opinion, it's about 2-to-1 favorable for private universities and a double-digit advantage in favorability for online universities as well. This reflects a theme that I think we see throughout the data in Arizona, which is that the public wants more choices, more options for both graduating high school students and for adults who want to pursue more education and training, and they embrace the many different opportunities that are available today in Arizona. So with that basic framework of public opinion on some of these institutions, we then asked people how they felt about the state's attainment goal, as you'll see on the next slide. And we let them know that Arizona has set the goal of ensuring that by 2030, 60% of Arizonans between 25 and 64 will complete some kind of education or training beyond high school. We also let them know the current progress toward that benchmark, with 48% of Arizonans meeting that standard, and then ask them to tell us whether they think more should be done to meet that standard, enough is being done, or less should be done. And overwhelmingly here, Arizonans tell us they want action. 63% say more should be done. That is 12 times the proportion who say less should be done. So there is an overwhelming consensus here that that voters would like to see more done to move those numbers up and get closer to that 60% goal. And as Paul was noting in the discussion of the prior poll, this sentiment is remarkably not just bipartisan, but it cuts across virtually every demographic subset of Arizona voters. 2/3 of women and 60% of men would like to see more done. Majorities of voters of all parties, including not just 76% of Democrats and 62% of independents, but also a 53% majority of Republicans, tell us they'd like to see more done to meet this goal. And tellingly, there's also very little difference when we look at the educational attainment of voters themselves, as you'll see on the next slide. Among those segments of the electorate who have completed some sort of education beyond high school, if we move forward one slide, you'll see that we've got roughly 3 in 5 voters, regardless of the amount of education they themselves have completed, who are saying they'd like to see more done to get Arizona to this goal. This was an election where we saw deep divisions among voters based on the amount of educational attainment they themselves had. College educated voters are increasingly aligning with Democrats and non-college educated voters with Republicans. And on a range of policy issues, we see those same kind of stark divides. We don't see that here. And I think that reflects the broad consensus about the value that some form of education and training beyond high school has for the public. Finally, there's also very little difference by geography, as you'll see on the next slide, when we look at Maricopa County, Pima County, and then the balance of the state, as well as the different types of communities in which voters live. All the differences are negligible. A broad consensus that, yes, we should be doing more. And that consensus, as you'll see on the next slide, translates into a desire for political action. 73% of Arizona voters say they would be more likely to vote for a candidate for elected office in the state if they supported doing more to achieve that attainment goal. Tellingly, because as you saw before, the number was in the low 60s of the proportion who wanted more done. There's even some voters who think just enough is being done that are saying, yeah, I still would be more likely to vote for a candidate who wants to take action on this. And again, this was a sentiment that cut across partisan lines. So it is not just good policy. Frankly, it's also good politics in Arizona to be for this. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we might take action to help increase the number of Arizonans who complete education beyond high school. And Arizonans embrace a wide variety of different approaches. You'll see some of the most popular ideas on this slide, each of which is backed by at least 3/4 of voters. What I think is particularly telling here, and Paul noted this in the previous poll, is not just the breadth of support, but its intensity. The percentage of voters who tell us they strongly support taking each of these actions, it's an outright majority for everything that you see on this slide. So it isn't just that voters want it done, it's that they feel pretty strongly and passionately that it's a good idea. The 3 items at the top of the slide in particular, more access to career training and readiness programs, expanding access to AP and dual enrollment courses to let high school students get college credits, and then more online education opportunities that would help working adults, parents with young children, and rural residents get access to the same opportunities that those in other segments of the electorate have. So the final set of questions that we explored in this poll had to do with the awareness and use of the FAFSA form. As you'll see on the next slide, we asked people if they were familiar with it when we described it to them. 2/3 told us that yes, they were familiar with it, including 2 in 5, 38% very familiar. As you'll see from the demographics on the right-hand side, it's not surprising that younger voters tend to be most familiar. and that those who themselves have a four-year college degree or more are also more familiar. These are people in age groups and based on their own educational attainment, people who are more likely to have a personal reason for having encountered the application. And as you'll see on the next slide, there is a sense that it is a good thing if more people fill it out. We explain to people that it's a gateway to receiving federal student aid, that people who fill out the application are more likely to actually attend some form of higher education. And in that context, we've got more than 2/3 of voters who are telling us they would favor creating incentives for Arizona high school students to complete that application. And again, it cuts across most demographic subgroups within the Arizona electorate as well. Similarly, as you'll see on the next slide, when we asked about the notion of requiring Arizona high schools to provide students and families with assistance to complete the application, again, there's a broad consensus among most demographic groups. 3/4 are telling us they would like to see Arizona high schools be required to provide that assistance that they think students and families would benefit from. So bottom line coming out of the survey, you'll see some conclusions summarized on the next slide. And it really shows, I think, a lot of separate opinions that Arizonans hold that sort of weave together to demonstrate their strong support for action to ensure that more Arizonans are getting access to this kind of education and training. Strongly positive sentiments toward those institutions of higher learning in the state. A broad bipartisan belief that the state should be doing more to reach that goal of 60% of Arizonans having some form of education or training beyond high school. In the political context, a strong willingness to support candidates who have taken action to try to meet that goal. And then broad support for a range of policies, including helping more families get access to federal student aid forms that will help to make that goal a reality. So all of these arrows pointing in the same direction and showing some broad, strong, and bipartisan enthusiasm for giving Arizonans more options to get education and training beyond high school. With that, I'll hand it back to Rich to talk about some of the implications of the data.
Thanks, Dave and Paul both. When we are looking to, and I'll speak for Amanda on this also, when we are looking for partners to help us with polling and research, Dave and Paul are two of the best that you can get, and also represent traditionally slightly different perspectives as far as clients they work with. So in this case, it was great to have a tremendous bipartisan team, if you will, in some ways, to look at this research. And also, I think it helped incredibly with just the credibility of the research and the findings, knowing that we really had two partners working on a lot of this together. So I want to thank Dave and I want to thank Paul for their tremendous work on this, and also with the way that they lay it out, making it crystal clear what our voters are thinking, what some of the barriers are that we find, and kind of what that means as far as the implications, not just to the state, but those who are leading the state. So let me recap just a little bit about what we heard. I think, first of all, important to remember, 6 in 10 voters believe that Arizona should do more to increase the percentage of Arizonans with post-secondary education or training. Super important, and it also really brings me to the point where it's affirming to know that people understand, why that post-secondary education and training is so important. It's not education for education's sake. The voters clearly know that it's education to help the individual, their families, the community, and the state, and to be able to take advantage of all these great opportunities that are coming to our state. We also know that 3 in 4 voters, 75%, say they are more likely to support candidates who champion policies that advance education beyond high school. I did see a question earlier in the chat that said there seems to be a widening gap between what people want and who they're voting for, not just what is being given to them once those folks are in office. And I think, this question goes to that in some ways. And also, we did see certain referendums this year that I think people were trying to think about how we might advance the solutions on this issue that we keep seeing. So I think our primary system does have a big impact on who is elected, and we also know in our primary systems that we often see people who are really far right or far left dominating those primaries. But what we saw clearly here is 75% say they're more likely to support candidates who champion policies that advance education beyond high school. And we need to hold people to that as we elect people and then as they go about leading our state. So I think I'll end up this saying that voters are not just supportive, but they also say they want to increase seeing specific actions here. They want to increase access to career training programs, 95% support on that. Expanding dual enrollment opportunities for high school students to earn college credits before they're in college, 93 support on that. And I know we'll get into this just a little bit more, but those are also a couple of the items that were cut as we saw the last legislative session come to the end. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and turn it over now to Amanda to add anything she wants to make here as we talk about some of the action steps for policymakers and any comments she wanted to make on some of the data that Paul talked about.
Thank you so much, Rich. One thing I'll just add is I really appreciated the question in the chat around really this disconnect between where we see very strong, consistent agreement on the big issues and what's happening in terms of the results that we're getting. Rich, you touched on this, but I just want to make sure that those tuning in today know that one of the areas that Center for the Future of Arizona explored through the 2024 Arizona Voters Agenda were voter views on systemic issues such as partisan primary systems. And our findings show that 77% of Arizona voters support making changes to our primary system, recognizing that it tends to fuel partisanship and create a gap between voter priorities and outcomes. So I think part of this discussion is continuing to hold leaders accountable for the priorities that Arizonans across political parties, across age, have said are important, and to continue to explore why are Arizonans not seeing the solutions that they're wanting through our public policy, and to explore all options. Another issue that we explored in our Arizona Voters Agenda, and again, all the resources will be shared at the end, is in state spending, really looking at to what extent what do people think about the cycles that we're in of kind of feast or famine, where we have huge surplus that allows time, investment for one-time projects, and then deficits that force cuts in very difficult areas, some of which Rich highlighted today. And those are also areas that Arizonans are very eager to see long-term solutions. The only things that I'll just add in terms of reiterating what's on this slide is just that Arizona voters are hungry for action, as Rich alluded, and you see a number of those actions here. These are, again, practical solutions. Arizona leaders are in positions to be able to expand access to dual enrollment so that students can earn college credit in high school. When we talk about a return on investment, these are important, practical policy solutions that increase the number of students pursuing post-secondary, and we know the research shows that they are far more likely to succeed and complete. These are smart investments that Arizona can make. And we know that workforce competitiveness is top of mind for every Arizonan. The impact of education goes far beyond personal success. We know it is foundational to Arizona's workforce and economic competitiveness. A well-educated workforce attracts and retains businesses, it drives innovation, and it ensures that Arizona remains competitive on a national and international level. It is huge that we have wins like TSMC, but simply winning TSMC does not mean that the work is done. We have to talk about workforce development hand in hand with educational attainment. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to remind our elected leaders and to be partners in the solutions, that when we talk about workforce, it includes increasing educational attainment. The vast majority of jobs in Arizona and the kinds of quality jobs that we want to attract and retain in our state absolutely require education beyond high school. They require our young Arizonans to pursue technical and trade certificates, to pursue 2-year and or 4-year. And it's not just for our young people, it's for our entire adult population. So I just think it's really important that we continue to very clearly make that connection between workforce competitiveness and educational attainment. Arizona voters understand that these are not separate issues and they go hand in hand. So thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Amanda. Before I kind of take us home here, I don't think we have much in the way of Q&A right now. I think we are going to have a couple of minutes at the end where we may be able to answer a couple. We've moved through this pretty efficiently, and would love to be able to answer some questions from the audience through the Q&A function that we have available to us. So let me just put a little bit of a bow on this. So what I've heard today, and I think what you have heard, is that the data provides elected officials and really all of us as leaders with a roadmap to align priorities with the needs of Arizonans and to make a commitment to that through our investments and through leadership that we show in the state. It's crystal clear that voters across the political spectrum, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, where they live, support expanding career and technical training programs. They want to make college more affordable. They understand why attainment is important to the well-being of our state in the future. And they certainly want to help more students complete the FAFSA so they can access some of that federal Pell Grant money, for instance, and work study money that helps them attend one of our colleges or universities here in our state. I think that what I would encourage our policymakers to prioritize moving forward into 2025 are maybe the things that aren't blockbusters when it comes to the expense side. As much as we would like to have, a $300 or $400 million financial aid program like a lot of other states have that we invest in as a state, that may not happen this year. But here's some things that can happen. We can make the marginal investments that are needed and that voters are demanding to increase funding for job training and career programs. There was no reason for us to cut some of those adult education programs from our community colleges last year. We can certainly reinstate and expand access to dual enrollment and online education to make higher education more flexible, to promote confidence in those who take those dual enrollment courses in high school to know that they can complete college level work. And then also to make things more accessible for our rural and adult students. That's something we can do that will not take blockbuster types of funding. And then finally, we saw what happened with our FAFSA completion rates last year. And unfortunately, they dipped below 40% with a goal of 50%. As a state, especially because we know the importance of accessing that federal money for our lowest income students in our state, that is the opportunity group to help us reach our goals. We have to have stronger FAFSA completion support in high schools to make college more affordable. These three things: increased job training and career programs, expanding access to dual enrollment and online education to make higher education more accessible and affordable, and also a stronger FAFSA completion effort, are things that we can get done this year. And I hope that folks on this call will help us move forward with together. And the last part I'll say is moving forward together is extremely important. We have to have an army of the willing, a coalition of the willing. Some of that are on this call. If we're going to influence our legislators, which maybe aren't hearing the exact same things from their most vocal constituents. It's going to take all of us to help move this forward. But we do have everything to gain in our state if we do move it forward. The economic impact to the individual, their communities, and the state is really undeniable. And on the other hand, it's not hyperbole to say that if we do not focus on increasing attainment in our state, the very future of our state and the financial future of our state, could be at risk. So if there are questions in the Q&A or the chat, happy to take a couple, and I think Amanda and our pollsters would be too. Looks like we did get several answered during the time that we had, so that's terrific. Any final questions before we adjourn?
Rich, I just want to add that Center for the Future of Arizona is here as a resource to leaders working to move our state forward. If you reach out and look at our data on the website and you're looking for particular answers in the data or have follow-up questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to follow up. And we have much more data available than what we're even able to share on our website. And again, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, statewide organization here to help others move forward on the priorities of Arizona. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Amanda. One thing that is coming up in the chat a little bit in the Q&As, and it doesn't surprise me because these findings are so overwhelmingly positive for access, success, and attainment, is how the survey methodology was thought about here. Dave and Paul, would you guys mind coming on and talking just for 5 minutes about the survey methodology and how we really how we efforted in every way to make this representative of our state and of the voters in our state?
Sure, I can speak to the Everything to Gain survey, and then Paul can chime in on the other piece. Although I think both of them used fairly similar techniques. In our case, we drew a random sample of Arizona voters from the voter file. So we're starting with the state database of people who are registered to vote in Arizona. We set a number of quotas to make sure that sample was representative of the state by geography, political party affiliation, gender, age, and a range of other demographic variables. We reached out to people with invitations both through calls on landline phones and wireless phones, and also text messages sent to wireless phones, because obviously people like to communicate in different ways, and having multiple modes to communicate the survey ensures that you can get a more representative and diverse sample. And once we got the data back, we looked at the demographic balance of the respondents and then made some minor adjustments with statistical weighting in cases where our data varied from the profile of voters overall on the state voter rolls. Very standard methodology for doing surveys of this type, and it ensures that the set of Arizonans that we spoke to look like Arizonans more broadly. Our overall sample size gives us a margin of error of under 5%, and that is absolutely considered sort of the industry standard for statewide surveys, very typical sample size.
For the Arizona Voters Agenda, we conducted all live voter surveys conducted by live operators. We dialed both home phones and cell phones, direct dialing cell phones as required by law. As Dave mentioned, a 500 sample gives about a 4.3 margin of error, which is still well within what we'd like to see with this type of data. We talk to likely voters, people who have a history of voting in our elections, plus new registrants who had registered in a period of time to ensure that they had demonstrated the enthusiasm to vote in this upcoming election. In addition to that, we balance it based on what we've seen in traditional voter turnout throughout the state of Arizona, balanced by age, party, gender, and region, so that we could look at, Republicans, independents, not only unaffiliated voters, but the other parties as well as Democrats, and then balance it based on age. Still over about half of our electorate is over the age of 55, so we do still skew a little bit older, and we find that this to be a reliable sample size as we go through the election.
Thank you both for that. It is really interesting, and like I said, unsurprising that people would want to know a little more about the methodology based on such positive results. What it tells me is that Arizonans agree that this is very important, And I think our friends from the Center for the Future of Arizona would agree, and that we should invest in education more robustly than we are today. On behalf of everybody, I want to thank you all for staying on and for your attention today and for the great questions that have popped up. I would encourage all of you to reach out to Amanda or I or our communications team here, Diana Figueroa, and if there are further questions, or if you want to have a further discussion about some of this or learn more about the findings that we have. And with that, I will sign off for the day. I want to thank everybody who helped put on this webinar also. It takes a lot of work to get one of these done and to run smoothly, and I think today's did. So I appreciate everybody's attendance, and please reach out to us. Go to our website or to our everythingtogain.org campaign website if you would like to find out more. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you to the
Thank
media as well who attended. If you'd like to follow up with me, you can feel free to use that email address here on the slide, and we can provide additional data or more about the campaign or an interview with our president and CEO, Rich Nickel. So thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.